All right, Pablo, thank you so much for driving all the way from Houston here to Dallas to come visit. And we had wonderful conversations about the faith and, how far the Lord has led us so far. So thank you for being willing to share your testimony as well.
Yes, sir. Praise God.
Just start off with, a basic question, more so tell the viewers how, what faith meant to you, like what was your childhood backstory like?
I would say when it comes to faith, when I was a kid, I really, I would say I had none, to be honest with you. Uh, the reason why is, I come from a Catholic church, from a Catholic background. Being a Latin person, that's pretty much the tradition for every kid there, for every family. You're just raised up in a Catholic environment, and so for me, Catholicism, the way I viewed it, religion was more about tradition and what's the word for it? I would guess labor, or you have a checklist to do, and it's more tradition, and you have to do more things. And so, obviously, being a kid and not really truly understanding, but being told what exactly to do, it's not obviously the most attractive thing. And so, it was really hard for me to abide in that, abide in God, and I really had no understanding of what it was. And so I can say that, I had no faith growing up as a kid, and it was just really hard for me. But whenever I would see God, it would always be for my own benefit, my own desires, my own will, but never truly for out of necessity. And that's something that I lacked as a kid, and yeah, pretty much that. And so when it came to religion, when you're a kid and you're being told to do certain things, it's natural for kids to not really want to do them. You're not as obedient. So that's pretty much where it was for me when it comes to like, whether was it religion that was the issue? It wasn't, which is I didn't have the full understanding of it. I never had like the deeper desire to go and ask more questions about it, is what I would say.
Right, and then you lived your life more on autopilot. Would you say, like, when I met you in college, we were in the same boat, just kind of living for ourselves, making our own morality, from what we see of, American standard. If you're not hurting someone, you're okay. So how would you say that, like, living without faith was when as you got older?
Well, just in general, growing up, I always felt alone. I always felt like an outcast just because my physical appearances, like as a kid, it was easy for other kids to make fun of me. And so, by the way I looked, or, by mostly that, or, if I messed up, people would like make fun of me. So I wasn't really like the best at anything. And so it was pretty easy for people to bully, to come at me. And that never really, like I said, it never really made me pursue religion, but it always made me think about like who I was, or the type of person that I would want to be. And so when I moved to the US, even though it was a fresh start for me, I would still see the pattern. I would still be like picked on every now and then, but eventually got to the point where I was like seeking philosophy as my answer to things, but I was not really disciplined in that area. Even then, I would say like the my anxiety, my depression, and my loneliness grew even worse. I feel like now life was telling me that these are the things that you should be looking for. And because I was not get accomplishing those things, it just felt like my life was meaningless or worthless, or like I was not living up to the standard that, that I should be. So
So would you say that you're like the way you valued your life was based on if you were achieving goals that you set out?
yeah, 100%. Or not even just like accomplishing goals, but because I felt like there was a standard, that people, you had to be a certain way, you had to look a certain masculine way for women to be attracted to you, or you had to be, let's say, the top 10% at a hobby, or maybe in the, what is it, in the corporate world for people to actually respect you. You had to be the best child, you have to be a certain way for your parents to finally admit that, okay, we deem you as worthy. of a child, and now we will leave you alone and we won't bother you, you know? So that's what I felt like, that was the standard. And every time I would fall, let's say into pornography, or, I would not go exercise, or I would have a cheat meal, or I would disobey what my parents told me, I felt like I was falling short of that standard. And now the burden was growing and growing and growing. And, it's like at that point, it's like you don't even feel motivated to go out and work on yourself. You just feel like it's a chore. And it's just hard for me to actually do anything up to that point. And it got really bad to the point where I was actually questioning my own morality, because I wouldn't say I was like a full on atheist, but I was more on the nihilist side, which I know it goes hand to hand with atheism. But at the same time, I couldn't fully say that, there was no God. I was more on the agnostic side of things. But the thing, whenever you're with a nihilistic perspective and borderline atheist, when you say things that, there is no God, in a way you're saying that there's no morality. God has created a standard of rules. He defines sin with evil, and, righteousness with what is good. But whenever you're an atheist, you create your own standard. Whenever you say there's no God, whenever you say things like society creates their own standards, you can't really rely on society, because as the years go on, as centuries go by, certain rules that were, 100 years ago, certain rules will not live up to today's standards. It would be seen as like, oh, this is not inclusive. You would be canceled if you did certain things from the past. And so whenever I looked at my own morality, trying to define what was good and evil, I'm the type of person that I would dissect every single thing that I would do. So whether, I was walking down the hallway and someone would like cut me off, I would literally look at it and be like, am I being respected enough? And I'm not, you know, exerting a certain persona where it is respectable. And so trying to come up with my own morality, trying to come up with my own set of rules, it just becomes a lot heavier on the individual, because now it's kind of in a sense that you're playing God. It comes to the point where defining good and evil, it's just subjective, you know, because you don't want to be, at least in my end, I want it to be, because I was bullied. In a sense, I look for appreciation. I look for inclusivity in the wrong place. I look for those things in the wrong crowd. So I would always try to be accepted by others, but at the same time, I wanted to be respected. So it becomes conflicting whenever you're trying to live by a set of rules, but also be accepted by everybody else. And so trying to live for both things, not being good at juggling. I mean, it's not horrible, but it just makes you feel even. It just creates a bigger and bigger burden on you, and you don't even know what you're doing at that point. So.
So that was college. You basically had a lot of introspection, understanding that maybe two truths can't exist at the same time. But what was really pushing you to even accept the idea of God, let alone Jesus Christ could be that God?
So I remember this was actually the summer that I was working as at the gym rec at my university, the rec center. Uh, because I used to believe in the idea that you can create something out of nothing, because it goes back to the nihilistic mindset, or the nihilistic philosophy, where you say that life is meaningless, and you try to cope with the idea that when life is meaningless, you try to play it as a god and try to create something meaningful out of life, more of a legacy. And so I remember when I was working that summer at the gym, at my gym's rec center, I was working at what was it? At one of the entrances, and a couple guys just came up to me, and they just started asking me questions about, what do you believe in? Then I started telling them my perspective on things. I started telling them what life meant to me, and I told them like, "Hey, I believe that life is meaningless, and what was it? Life is meaningless, and that you can create something out of it." And they kind of they kind of laughed at me. Well, they did laugh at me. They were just like, how can something out of nothing, exist? How can you create something out of nothing? It doesn't make sense. There has to be something tangible beforehand or something powerful that can actually create something. But that was actually the first time where my personal beliefs were challenged. And whenever they asked me questions that I didn't know the answer to, I did research. I resolved that conflict with more of a like I was ego hurt, and so I would still try to push back, but whenever they kept on insisting like, "What's your evidence?" I had nothing, and so I just remembered them praying for me that hey, I hope God, can come into your life, and I feel like that was the first time that someone I felt like someone genuinely prayed for me or ask for God to come into my life. It didn't necessarily spark the idea of maybe God exists or not, but it did open my mind into other things, much as more questioning my own character, reflecting on the person that I was becoming. It wasn't until I actually started watching this anime with a couple of friends of mine, Vinland Saga, uh, where as I watched the show, one of the main concepts of that show is like, you have no enemies. And I never really truly understood that sentence until I started, getting more into that show and I started like my friends would talk about it. But the concept of that sentence of having no enemies, it's saying that if someone wrongs you and you hold a grudge onto them, you become a slave to them in a sense because now they in a way control your emotions. But whenever you say you have no enemies, it's much easier for you to forgive the other person whenever they have wronged you. And so I was the type of person that would hold grudges to people, to others whenever they have, looked at me the wrong way. And like I said, growing up, being bullied, you know, part of the reason that also my depression got heavier and heavier because I was not living up to the par or trying to compensate or trying to what is it minimize because my goal when I was in school was trying to prove everybody wrong, and when I felt like I was falling short of that, I felt like my bullies were right. And so that's why the depression got even heavier and heavier because I was still a slave to them. But the thing is like, you know I could run into them 10 years from now or tomorrow or the day of tomorrow, and they would probably not remember about it. But because I worked my whole life to prove them wrong, and I tell them like, "Hey, I did this to prove you wrong." The next time I see them, they could be like, "Dude, I don't remember you." And so it crashes you down even more. And when I started looking at my behavior and my own character and understanding the meaning of having no enemies, it opened up my heart to wanting to love people more on an intimate level, trying to forgive not only myself, well, not only others, but more myself. And so it was actually that's the following year, once I was finishing up school, that I was reflecting on who I was because I knew I was a crappy person. I knew that I was doing a lot of bad things. I knew I was treating my family poorly. I knew I was treating my sister poorly. I know I was treating my mom poorly, my younger brother, my friends, my father, even my dog. I was not putting any love or any intimacy into those relationships. And so I knew that I really wanted to grow as a person, but I never really had a standard for that. Like I said, if you're like with a nihilistic perspective, trying to come up with your own definition or trying to come up with a standard of your own, it's really hard when you don't have a criteria of your own. So for me, trying to create the idea of a perfect man or of a good man, at least, not even just a perfect, just a good man, a loving man, it's really hard when you don't really know what love is. I didn't know what forgiven was. So my idea of love could have been just love the ones that, help the ones that you love. And that's about it. But true definition of love, like Corinthians says, is that it's someone that's not prideful, it's not boastful, it's not jealous. Love keeps no track of wrongdoings. So right there, forgiveness is an aspect of love. to be able to love regardless of the circumstances or of the wrongs that people have done against you. And so I never really understood that until I actually, friends allowed me to, friends explained it to me better. Vinland Saga explained it to me much better. And just going full on board on trying to understand what it really means to forgive others. And so that was the first time I would feel my heart was opening up to the idea of becoming a better person. But when it came actually to knowing God and actually opening opening up my heart to the idea of God, it wasn't actually where I felt like, it was that sense of fear of dying is what really opened my heart to relying on God, to truly understanding that, okay, there's the idea of God truly exists. The fear of death is something that I never wish upon anyone, but at the same time, it was a blessing for me because looking back at it and looking where I am currently in my journey with God, in my walk with Jesus Christ, it's it definitely I cannot say it was a coincidence. It definitely happened for a reason. The purpose was for because God saved me. God came into my life to save me, and so therefore that's why God allowed it to happen. And I still remember that very night. I can say that my life at that point was going well. I was exercising. I was uh, I was working in an internship. I was meeting a lot of new people. I felt like I was starting to become my own man. And my relationships with my family were starting to get better. So everything was like moving in the right direction. And I was like, okay, like life is good. Everything's good. I'm starting to become independent. And then I remember that very night I was sleeping, you know, with no fear in life. And I just remembered a dream of, I kind of like to say that I was like in the Simpsons living room, and you're just like with that TV in front of you, but it wasn't the colorful panel. It was more of a neutral, more of a grayish um, environment. And I just remember I was looking at the TV, and it was just a bunch of static. And out of nowhere, the TV just turns off, and I'm just absorbed. I'm just consumed by that TV, and I just feel like I'm floating in darkness. And at that moment in time, I felt like I was dead. I just remember feeling nothing. I just remember seeing complete darkness. And I remember the next thing I remember is I abruptly woke up. I was shaking. My heart was beating fast. It was just like I just felt like a lot of stress. I felt like I was genuinely having a panic attack. And that's the first time the idea of death came into my mind. And I first went to see my pediatrician. And when he told me that there was something wrong with my heart, it wasn't something necessarily alarming. It was more like, hey, there's something off. You might want to go see a cardiologist about it. That's about it. No harm, no foul. But because I recently had that dream, and now my pediatrician is telling me, hey, go see a cardiologist because there might be something off with your heart. Um, I started overreacting about it. I started overthinking about it because I was feeling a lot of pain on the left side of my chest, and I kept thinking it's my heart, it's my heart, it's my heart, it's my heart. And so I eventually went to see a cardiologist. But the fear that I was feeling there, that I was feeling then, the stress that I was feeling then, it wasn't to the level that I was feeling in the future, in the upcoming days, in the upcoming weeks. But I just remember that day in the cardiologist, and this is one of the moments that I thank God for because it was him speaking through the nurse. It was giving me not a warning necessarily, but more of a sign as like, hey, my child, listen to these words. This is what's going to happen to you. And I don't want you to, and although you're going to be in a stressful environment, you're gonna be in an anxious state of mind, I want you to rely on me and nothing else. First Peter chapter 5 verse 7, it says, "Cast all your anxiety to God because he cares for you." Those exact words came out of a nurse who I never met in my life, of a nurse who I barely met for 30 seconds to a minute. It almost felt like she knew what was going to happen to me in the upcoming weeks, in the upcoming days. But she just told me that's that specific verse for a reason. I didn't comprehend it now, but looking back at it, it's like, man, that was no coincidence. That was God speaking through her. And I just remember her telling me that verse, and just encouraging me, hey, I'm I'm inviting you to my church. Come out. I didn't really take it too seriously in that moment. I was like, okay, I'm open to it, but I wasn't like, because obviously, Christianity, religion, it had a bad rep, when I was in college. It had a bad rep, it was very controversial. And so I was more on the side of thinking like, okay, I saw Christianity as a bad rep, but for some reason I was opening up to the idea of it. Not only that, but my brother in Christ and my best friend Michael, he was also going through a change in his own. Thank God about it, because he became a Christian person. He became a devoted Christian. And anytime I would bring up a problem about my struggles, about my anxiety, he would always give me scripture to rely on. He would always give me the word of God to rely on. Because at that time, whenever I was dealing with the fear of death, it's so scary because it made me really understand the nature of my mortality, the limits of a human being, that me as a human being, I cannot control. If I cannot even control my body, if I cannot control whether or not I'm going to have an aneurysm, I cannot control whether or not I'm going to have a heart attack, I cannot control whether or not I can have cancer. What makes me think that I have control over what my body's going to do in the afterlife? You know, it's really hard for me to go and say that I have control in my life, when in reality, I cannot even control my own body, you know? And so that stress of the pain in my heart, the stress of death, on the stress of what's going to happen to my existence, of my being in the afterlife, was so scary. It got to the point where I couldn't even trust anybody's word, you know? Not even my parents, not even my sisters, not even my friends. I couldn't trust anybody. Anytime my parents would tell me, "Hey, you're fine. You're just overreacting." I would just look at them with a face of, "How can you pridefully say that? How can you tell me that nothing's gonna happen to me, where when you're just as human as I am, as much of a human as I am? How can you tell me that nothing's gonna happen to me? How can you tell me you have the solutions to life, when you're just as human as I am? You have the same issues that I go through. You go through the same struggles that I go through. And you don't even have the solutions to those things, but you're telling me that you have the solution to everlasting life, or to any problem in life." I never really knew how much I love my mother until I started realizing the value in life, because I was so scared of leaving everything behind. I was so scared of leaving the world behind, that one of the things that I didn't really want to leave behind was my own mother. And so those 3 weeks were the longest weeks of my. It just felt like eternity, because I just knew that I didn't want to leave the world before saying bye to my own mother, before giving her one last hug, before telling her, "Hey, mom, I love you." But I'm also so happy that God taught me that, because I can generally say my relationship with my mom right now, yes, we have our ups and downs, but it's at its best, and it's still growing. Not only with her, but with my father. with my sister, with my younger brother. Yes, there are issues still now that are pending, but I can say that it's moving in the right direction, and it's all because of God, what He taught me in that moment. Yes, although it sucks that He allows bad things to happen, but He allows certain things to happen. He allows the suffering for His own purpose, for His own will, for the sake of my growth. And I just remember my TikTok feed, because I was so inclined on the idea of trying to grow as a person, become more loving, become a kinder person. I would only interact with videos, with reels that would promote that idea. And during that time, my TikTok feed started becoming more Christian content. And if you're a Christian follower, you've definitely heard of the name Cliff Neckley. Ask Cliff. And he goes out to different campuses, different universities with the purpose of being able to spread the gospel to other people, to help people understand what the true message of God is. And his content started appearing in my feed. Not only that, but the at the same time, my friend Michael, when he was when he would give me advice, it would always come to scripture. I didn't think of it much then, but now looking back, it's like everything was it was God's plan unfolding in front of me. Be still and know that I am God was the one verse that helped me get through the nights when I felt like I couldn't sleep, when I felt like I was gonna die. Relying on God and putting everything on God, giving all my fears, giving all my anxieties, giving all my stress to God, actually allowed me to sleep at night. Because there were a lot of nights where I couldn't go to sleep, where I would try to stay up till 4 a.m. in the morning. I became very spontaneous. I became very unmotivated. I became, I just gave up on life. I was so scared that I just couldn't get out of my bed. I couldn't even do the simplest things of just washing my hair. I couldn't even brush my own teeth. I would just get out of my bed just because my body told me that, hey, you need to go to the restroom. But as soon as I was done with that, I would just jump back in bed. I really did, I lost care for anything in the world. But whenever God taught me the idea that, hey, cast everything onto me because I am so powerful that nothing will stop me from protecting you. Nothing will stop me from saving you, my child. Everything that is of the world, yes, they can do all harms to you. They can all do kinds of things to you. But at the end of the day, I'm so powerful that I will inherit you as my child. And that's when I started becoming open to the idea of God, becoming to the idea of Christianity. But what actually did it for me was that what was the hardest thing for me, and I feel like for every Christian, the hardest thing to do is to come to Christ as you are. But it's because of Christ tells us, hey, I love you so much. Come to me as you are. Come to me, give me your full heart. I love you. Because I felt like I wasn't worthy of coming to Christ. Because like I said, I was a I was a sinful person. When I started growing into the idea of God and Christianity, I started realizing the flaws and how short I fell to the glory of God. How much wrong I did in my life. And I just felt like I was unworthy of coming to Christ. But whenever I see Christ telling that same woman that, hey, you are my daughter, you are mine, I felt like that was Jesus speaking to me in that same moment that, hey, I understand I see your impurities. I see the wrongs that you've done in your life. I see everything, but I still love you and you are my child. That's the first time I actually felt genuine love. That's the first time that I could actually rely on something greater. That's the first time when I, I truly, that's the first time in my life or in that moment of this great despair, of great anxiety, of great stress, where I finally realized that I cannot abide in humanity anymore. but I can truly abide in God, in the one true God, Jesus Christ. And slowly, those feelings of stress, those feelings of fear, those feelings of anxiety started going away. But it's not because I relied on my own. It's not because I relied in humanity, but it's because I relied in God. Because God came into my life, because Jesus Christ died for my sins, because He saved me. He saw me as His child. I finally was able to see the love that He gave to me, but that's only because God showed me that love through the people that were around me. And it was no mere coincidence that everything that I went through, it was no mere coincidence. It was no mere accident. It was no pure luck. God revealed Himself in that moment of great despair that I was having. Like I said, when I met that nurse, it wasn't a warning. It was God giving me a sign of, hey, this is going to happen to you. Rely on me. Rely in my arms. Abide in me. You are my child. And yes, although I'm gonna allow this suffering to happen through you, but it's because I want you to truly understand my love, my loyalty, my faithfulness. But also I also want you to understand my grace. Through faith, I have received His grace. And I can fully say now that I love Jesus Christ because of what He's done in my life, what He's brought into my life, because of the grace that He's brought in my life. I can truly believe in that. His people, His sheep will hear this message and will come to Him. And that's my only duty as a messenger, to spread the good news of the one who I testify for, of the one true God, Jesus Christ.